So I always start the Exploring Monastic Life course talking about the life of the Buddha, because the Buddha is our teacher. And through his life, he was illustrating to us how to practice. Because he appeared in this life as an ordinary living being. And there's many ways in which he had to deal with situations very similar to our own. So it's helpful to know about his life. Of course, there's a lot of legend and so forth and so on that goes around this. Okay. When we talk about the Buddha's life, we're seeing the Buddha as a living being who was like us, who became enlightened. So of those three ways I spoke about, that last way, as a being who became enlightened, because seeing the Buddha's life in this way really gives us a lot of inspiration and confidence that we too can become enlightened. In the Theravada tradition, they take the story very literally that the Buddha was an ordinary being, somebody on the path of preparation when he was born into this last life, and then attained Buddhahood in that life. In the Mahayana tradition, it said that actually the Buddha had attained enlightenment, attained full awakening eons ago, but manifests as an ordinary human being in order to show us through his life example how to practice and how to do it. So there's a difference in how you interpret it. It doesn't really matter. Okay? So the Buddha was born, in Buddhism they say, as a prince, the child of a king. Many scholars say that actually his father wasn't a king, that they had more of a republican type of government, and his father was the, kind of a chief ruler or somebody of many of the small republics that existed at that time. But be it as it may, he was, born into privilege, okay? And he grew up with privilege, having everything he wanted. So in modern day terms, it would be like growing up in middle class America, having everything you want. Because compared to the rest of the world, middle class America is really like the, having the wealth and sense pleasure of, a particular elite, if you can think of it in terms of the whole world population. Okay, so he grew up having everything he wanted. He excelled in everything. Okay, so he was the ideal, perfect kid. The one that our parents always wanted us to be, but we weren't. Okay, but his parents expected him to be the ideal, perfect kid, because when he was born, a soothsayer came and said, oh, he is a special kid, and he's either going to be a great religious leader or a great political leader. Okay. Now, his parents, having worldly values, what do they want for their kid? They don't want him to be a great religious leader. They didn't have the big mega churches at that time. They wanted their kid to be a big political leader. He was supposed to, take over the kingdom from his father, kind of like, from one George Bush to the next. And except you didn't have to be elected. But, starting, that kind of thing. And so he had all these parental expectations on his head, just like we did. Didn't we all have a lot of expectations from our parents? How we were supposed to grow up, what we were supposed to be and do. And he also had incredible luxury, like in middle-class America, most of us did. Of course, middle-class America, we don't consider our life luxurious. We think of the super wealthy as having the life of luxury. But like I said, when you compare our life to, the lives of people on this planet, we live a life of luxury, even though we don't necessarily feel that we do. His father was very protective of his child, and definitely didn't want him to come in contact with anything that would kindle his spirituality, because that would take him away from being the king. So he wasn't allowed to go out of the palace. So very protective parents. Now, I don't know how many of you grew up with very protective parents. How many of you had very protective parents? I did. Yeah. Maybe some of you had much more freedom than I did, but, so he wasn't really allowed out, and, he didn't really have any need to go out because everything was there. But he was curious, and so he snuck out of the house, like many of us also did. We usually went drinking and drugging into parties, but that's not what he did when he snuck out of the house. His charioteer took him into town because he wanted to see how beings really lived, I'm thinking in my own life, I went, through high school, college, and then I just said, I want to experience how life really is, and I returned my stuff and got a backpack and went traveling for a year and a half, because I wanted to see what life was really like. So I think many of us go through this kind of thing where we leave home and we want to see the world on our own, to learn about it, not just to study it in books. So he snuck out of the house, out of the palace, and on one of his trips he saw somebody who was sick, and he had never seen sickness before. I mean, that's really being protected, isn't it? He had never seen a sick person before. And he had to ask his charioteer what it was, and charioteer explained it to him, and do all beings have sickness like this? And, yes. So when he went back to the palace, that really affected him, Oh, everybody's subject to sickness. Everybody. Yeah. Even me, even everybody in the palace. He snuck out a second time, and this time he saw an old person hobbling around on a stick. And again, his charioteer had to explain to him what it was, because he had never seen an old person before. And again, he was quite shocked, and it made a very strong impact on him that he too would become old, and everybody he loved would become old. Yeah. Do you feel kind of shocked sometimes when you think that you're going to be old? That one day you're going to look in the mirror and there's going to be this old face there that you don't recognize? Yeah. For some of us, it's already reality. Yeah. Or do you ever think that someday it's going to be really hard to stand up and sit down and move? Yeah. For some people, it's already a reality. Yeah. Okay. But the body ages. Can't do what it used to do. So that also made him very thoughtful when he went back to the palace. The third time he went out, he saw a corpse. He saw a dead person. And again, the charioteer had to explain to him what that was. And that really made a profound effect on him. What is this mystery of death? That there is a person here one day, And the next moment, like that, there's nobody there. There's a body there. There's not a person there. Person's gone. Yeah. Death is rather shocking, isn't it? When you know somebody well, and then you look at their dead body, and they aren't there anymore. Okay? And then to think, one day this is going to happen to me too. You know, my nice, comfy little life with my identity and everything I'm familiar with and all my possessions and my loved ones. And this nice little identity that we've constructed for ourselves. That one day, our body's going to be here, but we won't be. And our consciousness will separate from this body and go on and take another life. You know? And when we're taking another life, it's not like, you know, we die and go up in the sky and I'm still me, you know, speaking English with my same personality, looking down saying, oh, who is going to be mom, who's going to be dad, you know, I'm accepting applications for parents now, please apply and I'll choose. No, the death process for an ordinary being is not like that. It's traumatic, you know, we're leaving our body and our whole ego identity and everything we know here. Yeah? And our consciousness is going on alone and having all sorts of appearances, karmic appearances, you know, that we think are real. And we're scared, and we're wanting another body because we cling on to a body as me or mine. You know? And so that propels some karma to ripen, and we go and take another body. When you get born again in one life form or another, we're not sure even whether we'll be human beings. We could be born as animals or some other kind of suffering beings. We don't know. No? It's very interesting when you walk around here, yeah, and you see the birds and you see the bunnies and our kitty and the deer and all the wasps and the bees, and, you know, to think these are living beings. And we don't know who they were in their previous life. Maybe they were human beings. And because of some kind of destructive karma, they got born in this life form. And think about what it's like to have that kind of mentality. What would it be like to be a bee? Yeah. What goes on in your mind all day if you're a bee? How much choice do you have about what you do? How much understanding do you have about your life? Or even, you know, our kitty, or even a deer, you know, how much does a deer understand about what's going on? Does a deer have the opportunity to practice the Dharma? Yeah? So it really makes us think, you know, about death and rebirth. So likewise it did Siddhartha when he had gone out of the palace. So he returned to the palace, very thoughtful. He went out one final time without his parents' consent or permission. And this time he saw a wandering mendicant. Because in ancient India, as in modern India too, there are people who are wandering mendicants who usually wear like a saffron-colored robe. That's considered the color that mendicants wear. A rather ugly color, but they, you know, in Indian culture. And they wander from place to place and accept alms and do their spiritual practice. And so when Siddhartha went out and saw this, again, he was very curious. Who is this person? They don't look like all the other people in the village. And the charioteer explained to him, oh, that's somebody who's looking for an answer to this puzzle of birth and death. So when he went back to the palace that night, he was really thinking about it all, you know, being, having been very profoundly affected by seeing sick people, old people, corpses. And then here's somebody who's trying to get out of that cycle. And so he thought about it a lot, and he decided that he was going to leave the palace. Well, his parents certainly weren't going to give their blessing. And in the meantime, he had already been married, and his wife had just given birth to a son, which in ancient India, as in modern India, there's bias towards having sons. So he was, you know, on top. I mean, like I said, you know, he did everything right and was the perfect kid. And then his wife just had a child, a boy. And here he is thinking about aging, sickness, and death, and getting out of cyclic existence. So at the end of the evening, when all of the dancing girls had fallen asleep on the floor in all sorts of sprawled out ways with spit dribbling from them, he looked around and he said, "It's time to go. It's time to go." So he left the palace in the middle of the night without telling his parents. The charioteer drove him out a ways, and he then took off of all his royal clothing and all his jewelry. The reason the Buddha has the long earlobes was because as a prince he wore such heavy jewelry that it stretched out his earlobes. He shed all of that and put on the rags of a wandering mendicant. So you can imagine the next morning all hell broke loose at the palace. Yeah. But where did he go? And in the meantime, you know, he's just walking around with his alms bowl. It's not a begging bowl. Monastics do not beg. They do not ask for food. They have an alms bowl, and people are free to put something in it or not. Okay. Now, let's stop for a minute. Do you see some parallels in this with your life? Yeah? Are there some ways where you can relate to the story of the Buddha's life? Yeah? Because I think probably if you're here, you had some thoughts going on about what is this life all about, and what am I doing here, and what is meaningful. Huh? And did the people around you understand when you brought these issues up to them? Probably not. Yeah, you may have felt like a fish out of water, you know, having these kinds of thoughts and wishes to explore your spiritual side, but the people around you think that you're completely weird. Yeah, it's exactly like what Siddhartha faced. Yeah. Father said, "Yeah, why are you worrying about old people, sick people, dead people? It doesn't matter. Yeah, live your life and enjoy, and you're going to be king. Vote Republican." You know, you don't need social welfare programs for the aging, sickness, and dying. Excuse me. I can't help it sometimes. I can help it, but I choose not to. Yeah. But do you see the similarities? Yeah. Do you see the similarities? And all of us, in one way or another, had to wrench ourselves. I don't know if that's strong enough or too strong of a word, away from the situation we were in order to pursue our spiritual yearning and our spiritual questions. You know, because, you know, if we were to go around and ask everybody's parents, everybody who's here, your parents, yeah, if they thought you would grow up to do this, if this is what they had in mind for you. Would any of your moms say, yes, you know, I thought my son, daughter would be a Buddhist and be interested in becoming a monastic? I don't think so. Yeah. They had another life planned for us. And the life they had planned for us was because they care for us and they love us and they want us to be happy, and they're worldly people, so the only happiness they know is the happiness that comes through the senses, through having beautiful things to look at, good sounds, smells, tastes, touches, you know, and everything that comes from that, a good reputation, yeah, popularity, a good social life, a good sex life, a good whatever it is, lots of money. Yeah, that's what our parents wanted for us, isn't it? You know, we were raised to duplicate their lives, but have it better than they did, because that's the American and Canadian dream, isn't it? Yeah, that your kid's life be materially better than your own life. And so our parents loved us, that's what they all wanted for us. And then all of our old friends, yeah, they're into it too, they're doing that. So everybody's replicating that life in some way or another. And then we come along and say, that kind of life doesn't mean anything to me. That's not what I want. Yeah. I'm thinking about aging, sickness, and death, and I want to get out of this cycle of birth, aging, sickness, and death. And modern society looks at you like you're out of your mind. Don't they? You know? Oh, what do you want to do that for? As my parents put it, you're becoming a what? What? Yeah. So, you know, the Siddhartha, the Buddha, there's something in his life that is similar to ours, you know, where you have to have some internal courage to break with what everybody else around you is doing and saying, I can't live that way because inside of me my spiritual yearning is too strong, and I've got to follow it, and I've got to find some meaning to this life besides replicating my parents' life in a slightly mutated way. Mm-hmm. Okay, so there's some similarities there. When I went to Taiwan to take the Bhikshuni ordination, the temple that I was at, they had panels all around the inside and the outside of the walls, and each panel showed a scene from the Buddha's life. And so I used to circumambulate the temple. Sometimes after lunch we were supposed to go to sleep, but I'm not in the habit of sleeping in the daytime, so I had to lie down because they would come and inspect that we were doing what we were supposed to do. And then I would get up and sneak out and, and circumambulate the temple. And for me, walking around the temple was a meditation, looking at all these different scenes from the Buddha's life and how he lived, you know, and what he experienced and what was going on, you know, being that character of the Buddha, and finding in the process, you know, many similarities with my own life, which is more of a modern rendition. Which is why I think, the Buddha manifested in that way and lived that way, so that we could really identify with what he went through. It wasn't like clear, smooth sailing for him. Yeah. Okay, so let's leave it here for today. Questions or comments? Yeah.
I always, or I wonder if you could clear this up, because I sort of thought that a deer was capable of learning the Dharma.
That you thought who?
A deer, or an animal, was capable of learning the Dharma.
Oh, okay. So, asking if an animal is capable. Unless there are bodhisattva manifesting in that form, I think it's difficult. Our little kitty, if you've seen her around the chip-chips.
Right, yeah.
Yeah? And around the bugs. I mean, if there's a bug, she will chase it and swat it and eat it. And keep telling her, don't kill anybody. They want to live just as much as you do. Yeah. It's the first precept. She doesn't get it. Yeah. She doesn't get it.
But there are a lot of humans that don't get it too.
That's very true. Yeah, very true. Yeah. But, so you can see it's much harder as an animal to learn. You'll see on Thursday night that she'll come in for the teaching that we stream. How much she understands? I don't know. Yeah. She's getting some good seeds in her mind stream, but I don't think there's much understanding to take away.
Venerable, I believe it was either this morning or last night during the Lamrim meditation, we were talking about the preciousness of a human rebirth and what it takes to have a human rebirth. I believe they mentioned three things: the avoiding the 10 non-virtuous actions, practicing the 6 far-reaching attitudes, and then there was a third one, making prayers.
Yeah.
So does it require all of those 3 things, or would one of them only suffice? Or?
Okay. So regarding those 3 conditions, our causes for a precious human life, do we need one or all 3? We need all 3. Because practicing ethical conduct is what creates the good karma just to have an upper rebirth. Practicing the 6 far-reaching practices creates the karma to have the good circumstances in our life to meet the Dharma, to have enough material wherewithal, and so on, so that we're able to practice. And then the dedication is needed in order to steer the virtue that we created so that it will ripen in that way. So we need all 3 causes. Anything else? Okay, so let's just sit quietly for a minute, digest, and then we'll dedicate. will dedicate. Due to this merit, may we soon attain the awakened state of Guru Buddha, that we may be able to liberate all sentient beings from their suffering. May the precious Bodhi mind, not yet born, arise and grow. May the born have no decline, but increase.